Welcome everyone to our new in-depth mindset education for today. This session is on the integrated learning tool, which I know you're going to get a lot of value out of. It is about the process of critical thinking. We actually did this in our business mindset class last night, and it was very amazing to get some really great feedback. People broke out into breakout rooms, and I showed them the process, and they worked on different aspects of this process I'm about to walk you through. So you are going to love it as well. It's going to definitely help you raise your level as a coach, get you thinking differently. And so this class was inspired by a book that I have been reading that I just finished actually, and it's this one. It is Thinking Like a Lawyer, and it's by this guy here, Colin Seal. Really fun book to read and really interesting. And what he talked about how is critical thinking, it's our ability to problem solve. It's our ability to make rational decisions. It's our ability to make informed decisions, which are all really important skill to have in life and also in work and the work we do. And so the reason why this is important for us as coaches is because we want to take in information that we receive, and we want to make sure that the information we're receiving or we're taking in, we've critically thought about that information, but we're also making informed decisions in the way that we go and help a client. And we want to do that by making sure that we're asking enough questions, and maybe a full range of questions. So we're going to go through that. What I really loved is this Colin Seal talked about this book and it was really geared for students, and really teaching them how to not be a passenger in your learning, but actually be a participant in the learning. And sometimes we can be given so much information, and we can be given more and more books that we read, content that we absorb, but we're not taking the time to critically think about that information that we're receiving and seeing how it fits into the bigger picture. Now, you would have remembered, if you had come and done one of our almost very, very first sessions we had what was the mechanism of learning. So if you remember this model, we talked about this in a couple of our sessions early on, which was one of them was information overload and how we get stuck in this. And so critical thinking, if we look at it from this model, is that when we get, and we're not taking time to organize our information and integrate the information. And so sometimes that takes time away from the information for us to be able to absorb it and think about it, or just creating pockets of time after we've finished studying, or we've done a course that we take 30 minutes afterwards and think about the information we just accumulated. And so without doing that, what can happen is we're just accumulating more and more information, but we're not organizing it in a way that fits. And so that's why we can get into information overload. And so we want to be able to make sure that in this mechanism of learning that we're also stopping to organize and integrate the information. For me personally, I love writing. And so I'll take lots of notes when I do a course or when I do a class. Even when I take a book, I'm a bit of a geek, and I like highlights. I'm like a highlighter inside of books, which is probably like, oh my God, you ruin your books. Yes, I do. It'll be interesting for the next person who reads it. And so that way I can take in the information. So you have to think about when you receive information, what are you doing with that information? Are you just listening to it and that's it? We also want to process, and the part with critical thinking is the processing and analyzing that. And that's a skill, so it's not something that you're just naturally born with. It's a skill that you want to train, and I'm going to give you some strategies on how to do that. And so when it comes then to our dynamic, there are there's three topics that we're going to cover today. And one is what is not critical thinking. The next is how do we see both sides of a dynamic, and then I'm going to go through the integrated learning tool with you. This is not something I specifically created, something that I've adapted from the book that I read. So if you would love to have the worksheet for this session, then just comment in the chat below, and we'll get it to you. If you are in Maximum Growth Academy and watching this in our in-depth education, then you'll see there's a link just below. It says download, so that's the one that you want to click on. If you're watching replay, type in replay. If you are here live, welcome to this session. Okay, so the first point we're going to cover is what is not critical thinking. And so if I'm going to show you what critical thinking is, we first want to understand what it is not. And the interesting thing about critical thinking, you would think it would be like a skill that we learn, like riding a bike, but it is not. And it's not something that you can learn as easy. You just pedal, balance, and then off you go. There's a lot more complexities to critically thinking. And so what we want to be able to learn to do is to be able to look at a issue or a problem from multiple perspectives. And so what's interesting about Thinking Like a Lawyer, this book, he was actually a lawyer became a teacher. I think maybe a teacher became a lawyer. No, a lawyer became a teacher. And so as a lawyer, you have to look at, well, what would the opposition, what would they be thinking? What would their perspective be? And so when you have multiple perspectives, you can come up with a more solid case against what actually happened. And so we personally want to be able to have multiple perspectives when we're working with clients. So if we come, something I was sharing in my class last night that really resonated with the coaches was around that sometimes when we're trying to help someone, and we're really and you make such great traction in the session, and then you see them next week and they've taken some steps back and you're like, what just happened? Like, we just made some really great progress, and then you do some more work, they have some really beautiful heart opens and insights, and then again they're kind of stuck again. Like, what's going on? And so sometimes when we get that multiple perspective viewpoint, what can happen is we can start to see that there are other influences in their life that are playing into the dynamic that actually are impacting them. Let's say, for example, it is a client that you're working with and their spouse is kind of against the dynamic, against them doing coaching, against them growing, doesn't want them to outgrow them. And so there's that kind of internal conflict they have about the relationship. And so then that perspective is influencing your client's dynamic. And so sometimes what can be helpful is when we get to see that bigger picture dynamic. And so what is not critically thinking is when we read a book and then we don't do anything with it, or we've done a course, and then that's not critical thinking. It's taking that information and then processing it, asking questions, thinking about it. How does that all fit into everything else? And so which is important. And so the thing that is also not critical thinking is if someone says something to you and then you take it as gospel and then you believe it, that's not critical thinking. That's just implying someone else's worldview, and then you now adopt that worldview as your own without even really thinking about it. So how that might come into play when you're coaching with clients is we understand universal principles, and maybe we've had a lot more in-depth understanding of it. And so then when we say to a client, oh, this is based on universal principle, but you don't give them any context, you don't give them any understanding, and then they're not even critically thinking about it. They're just then adopting this new thought pattern, but not really having a deeper understanding about it. And so what we want to do is teach our clients to critically think, but also us to do it as well. And so when we do have information that we get, it's like, and because the less integration we do, sometimes the more fractured we can become, because we're taking in other people's perspectives, and we almost lose a sense of identity and sense of self because we have implied other people's opinions into our life. So that is what is not critical thinking. Our next part that we're going to cover is to see both perspectives. So as a coach, and I love the Demartini method for this, particularly that's the type of work that I do, is the Demartini, and utilize the Demartini method as a tool to help individuals to dissolve their emotional charges. And it gets us to see both sides of an issue. But that's of the issue itself. So if someone's perceives someone to be critical, where are they, what's the opposite and what's the benefit, and getting them to see the opposite sides rather than seeing something as negative, what's the opposite. But why do we do it? So we want to have a deeper understanding. Why do we go into wanting to see both sides? And so as we do that, it's also both sides of the dynamic that's going on for them. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate that is it's not necessarily just both sides of the trait action or inaction, but both sides of the dynamic that's actually happening at the same time. And so the reason why that is really important is because sometimes our biases filter out the information, and then we change that information, or we discard some of the information and think that it's not relevant. And then the result of that is we can actually prevent us from really being able to go in and deeply help and heal someone, because our biases are influencing it. So we want to remain as a coach like as neutral as possible. And so when we're like Switzerland, when we're like neutral, then we have the most objective viewpoint, because essentially that's what we're paid to do. I do, because I use the Demartini method. You might use a different tool, which is amazing. And so with the Demartini method, we come from a very objective perspective. And so the more objective I am when I'm hearing information and seeing information, and the less bias I have, the less I'm thinking about, oh, wow, that's happened to me, or that happened to another client, and then I'm thinking about that instead of being present with the client. That can then influence and impact the result the client's going to get, because I'm compounding my stuff and filtering, therefore having a bias, or another client who has a very different world and a very different experience, and then putting it onto them. I think what's also really helpful when it comes to being able to see both sides of the issue is we want to get a really, really deep, broad perspective of people's dynamic. And I don't know how much when you are in your discovery sessions, or whatever the strategy sessions, whatever the name is of the thing that you do before you meet your client. Some people just call it, let's have a chat. So whatever that is, I wonder how many questions you're asking to really get that multiple perspective viewpoint, and also the asking a lot of questions. So I'll ask about their history, their family dynamic, their finances, even if they may not necessarily coming to finances, their relationship, their what they have guilt and shame about, the particular issue itself. And I'll look at like a really holistic view of what's going on for them, because I want to know as much detail as possible. So that can be really helpful. So you want to be able to master that view of that opportunity to see things from multiple perspectives. So our last part that I'm going to cover with you is the integrated learning tool. And so this is a process that I've taken out of the thinking like a lawyer, and so hopefully you're going to love it. And if you are, shout out in the chat below. And so with this, we have the opportunity to go through this process together. So first of all, we have an analysis. So anytime we have a new bit of information comes in, we want to analyze from different viewpoints, which we've talked a lot about so far. And we want to have lots of viewpoints of that information. So basically you're getting viewpoints from, let me add me here, hey. So we're getting viewpoints from themselves, but you can also ask their partner or their spouses, their children, their work colleagues, so you can kind of get a really big picture. And so then we also want to look at our mistake analysis. So this can be helpful as a step that you can do as a coach, and I highly, highly recommend it. I was talking in my class last night, in the business mindset class inside of our Maximum Growth Academy, which is for coaches who want to help share their service with the world and maybe feel like they're just that stuck and they're not able to maybe share their voice, or they haven't owned their authority, or they want to remove some of the roadblocks or get more certainty in their message that they're sharing with the world. Then this is the class to come to and the course to come and be a part of. And so one of the things that we want to do, we had an immersion day actually. So we had 6 hours where we immersed ourselves in income certainty, which was very inspiring. And when I reflected on it the next day, I realized I had made a mistake. Now I know that necessarily isn't the word that we would use using universal principles, and there's no mistakes and there's perfection. But you know what? I'm gonna put my hand up to say that I could have done it differently on one particular point of the session. And I want to be able to analyze that because I'm humble enough to be able to say there's room for growth and development in the work that I do. We want to be able to do that as coaches instead of saying, oh, there's nothing I would change and everything was perfect. And so if we can analyze the mistakes that we've made as a coach, then we actually be able to serve our clients at a much deeper level. So that is part of a critical thinking aspect, is when we go in and we analyze our mistakes. So if you're not already doing it, I would highly recommend putting it into a once a month, once a week aspect of your working week where you review your sessions. So the next is the investigation. And so this is where you're gathering your information. So I was talking about this before, and it's really systematically getting all the data that you need, all the information that you need. For me, all I can explain it to, and it sounds a little weird, so stay with me, team, but it seems a bit weird, but I will gather information, and you've seen this in class. If you've watched me on a hot seat, you'll see me in class when I'm speaking to one of the coaches, and I get more information, and there's a point where it like clicks for me, and I'm like, okay, I see it now. And so I keep on asking until I get that. And so I can unpack that inside of Maximum Growth Academy, how we go about doing that. But that's like the simple version of it. And so when you have that information, like, okay, I see this really great picture now and I really get it, then that's what we're doing with the investigation. And if you're not there, then we haven't investigated it deeply enough. So then we do a discovery. So discovery is uncovering new information. We did this in one of our breakout rooms last night. It's like discovering new information. And so when we have an issue and someone presents us their ball of mess, and there's this messy ball of stuff that they're working through, and say, it's this issue in here that I'm really struggling with. And then as in our discovery, what happens is we might find that little bit of gold bit of information that comes out. And you're like, oh, wow, that new bit of information that was previously unknown is now known. That's going to make a massive difference. So can I share a story? So one of the members, they had not had a payment of one of their clients. And so it was quite a big payment and they were expecting it and it hasn't come through. So that one of the other coaches was asking them some questions and really going into discovery with their dynamic. And so what they actually discovered was, one, lack of boundaries in being able to say no. And the other is, through all of that, came to not being able to say no to their children. And so it was actually not because they were not saying no and they didn't have boundaries, the unknown bit of information that was all tangled in with that experience and no boundaries was actually interfering with their relationship with their children, which is their highest value. And so, which is so beautiful, because that new bit of information coming up, if they can shift that, it will also help with their business. Yeah, beautiful. And so that's when we get to find this like new discovery. And maybe not everyone has a new discovery, and we don't want to go down that rabbit hole every single time, but it's definitely a skill set we want to master and learn and develop, is how do we discover new bits of information that may be entangled inside of our best messy ball of mess. So then we've got settlement, and so this is where we reach this is more in the terms of a lawyer, this dynamic here, but it's like where they reach a new understanding of a new perspective, but that also can help with when we're coaching clients, because what we do, especially if we're utilizing the Demartini method, is giving that new perspective and that new understanding of the process that they're doing and the information they're receiving and the questions they're being asked. And so if we're able to do that, we're able to give them like a settlement or getting them to deeply like resolve their conflict. That's actually part of critical thinking, because we've been able to give them an outcome and settle on a result. There may be a little bit of negotiation sometimes, and so this is a skill inside of critical thinking that can be helpful, and that's where you're reaching a mutually agreed outcome. And so more so in being a lawyer, but sometimes it's a great skill to learn as a coach as well, especially maybe if you're going for a new opportunity and a new deal, maybe you've got a new contract in place and you want to do some negotiation. And then the last is competition. Now, again, it is in the lawyer bracket, but actually this is also helpful as coaches. Now, this isn't to go and start competing with every other coach and then have this the competition mentality running through, but sometimes healthy competition can get you moving. It can help you achieve more. It can help you raise to your highest potential. So that can definitely be helpful in terms of you as a coach. And so that is a round kind of view of critical thinking. Now, remember, this isn't a skill that you just riding a bike and you're off you go and you know how to do. And there are so many different components of it. We just saw that there's 7 components that you could be focusing on, and each of themselves is a skill set to be able to work through. Because sometimes some people will be really great at mistake analysis, maybe because internally they have a like self-criticism dynamic happening, although that's not the point of a team. And then other people may be struggling with, say, the discovery and just not really knowing what questions to ask and hone into, or how do they find new information and get a little bit stuck and blocked there. So definitely a skill. So today was really just opening you up to the idea of critical thinking. So hopefully this can make a difference, especially when we receive information. We might receive information through social media, through courses that we do, information that we read, and we want to critically think about that information. Don't take it just verbatim as true. Maybe think about that and see how it fits into your world and integrate it into the knowledge that you already have. Hopefully you have loved this class. If you have, drop your insights below. I just have one last thing before we wrap up, and that is we have what last thing? The end, not that one. If you want to make some huge leaps and bounds in your coaching practice, then come and join Maximum Growth Academy. We have 9 hours of classes each and every week for you to apply different aspects of personal development to help you to grow your coaching and to grow yourself and to grow your coaching business. So if you'd love to come and join us, please just drop me a DM. So thank you, team, for coming along for our class. I hope that you have found it valuable and insightful, and I look forward to seeing you at the next perfect time.